We begin my top 36 remaining running back rankings with running backs that I think are in that low end RB3 to high end RB3 range. We have Braylon Allen, Jerome Ford, Tyler Algier, Akers, White, Charbonnet, Madison, Spears, and Warren. Braylon Allen is playing against Indianapolis. I think he scores a rushing touchdown, which salvages his day. I do think that he's a quite risky play, though, due to the lack of volume that he receives. But in a plus matchup, I do think he scores a touchdown. Then we have Jerome Ford against New Orleans. He did see about 50% of the snaps this past week. He didn't receive as much volume. Against New Orleans, I think he's going to get a couple of chunk gains and receptions, and so I do like him as a low end RB3. Then we have Tyler Algier against Denver. I think they're going to be winning this game handily, and so I think he's going to see some volume. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think he's going to be quite efficient on the ground. Then we have Cam Akers against Tennessee. I think the Vikings are going to be handily winning this game, which is going to allow him to receive some extra volume, and I do think he scores a short touchdown in this one. Then we have Zamir White against Miami. I think he also scores a touchdown. It was interesting to see that after basically being phased out of the offense, Alexander Madison found a way to be so inefficient that he lost his firm lead on the workhorse role. I do think he scores, like I said. I just don't think he sees a ton of volume. Then we have Zach Charbonnet against San Fran. I think he sees some work in this one, including specifically in the receiving game against San Fran. I do think they're going to have to pass the ball quite a bit to stay in this game. Then we have Madison against Miami. I think he receives more volume and is more efficient than Zamir White, but I don't think he scores. And I really think that White and Madison are going to cap each other's upside. Then we have Tajay Spears against Minnesota. I think he sees a solid amount of work in the run game, but specifically in the passing game, which salvages his day. Then we have Jaylen Warren against Baltimore. He did practice in a limited fashion with a back injury, so he's questionable. I do think he plays, though. This past week, he had 66 rushing yards and some work in the receiving game. I don't think he sees quite as much work on the ground, but I do think he sees extensive work in the passing game, salvaging his fantasy day overall and making him a solid high-end RB3. Now we have running backs that I think are in that high-end RB3 to low-end RB2 range. We have Audric Estime, Nick Chubb, Rico Dowdle, and Tony Pollard. Audric Estime appears to have established himself as the RB1 in Denver, surprisingly overtaking Javonte Williams. I was scared for his sake that he might just be in the doghouse after that fumble a couple weeks ago against New Orleans, but no. He's looked by far, in my opinion, like their best runner of the football. I do think his passing game is volume is going to be quite limited, which therefore curbs his total ceiling. But in a plus matchup against Atlanta, I do think he sees a good amount of work on the ground and is going to be pretty efficient. Then we have Nick Chubb against New Orleans. I think he gets a couple of chunk gains and does score a touchdown in this game, making him a high-end RB3. Rico Dowdle is playing against Houston. With the absence of Dak Prescott, that's really hurt his efficiency in the run game, unsurprisingly. It is a tough matchup against Houston. I do think he sees quite a few receptions, though, and that does give him a safe floor, but his ceiling is obviously limited in this offense. And then we have Tony Pollard against Minnesota. Usually I would have Pollard ranked a lot higher, but Minnesota's run defense is elite. With their quarterback situation, it really doesn't help him out either. So for that reason, I think he's, due to sheer volume alone, going to be a safe RB2, low end RB2, high end RB3, but I don't think he scores a touchdown, and I do think that the matchup against Minnesota makes it pretty tough to have him much higher than this. If you like what you've seen and heard so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. I project out all the non-Thursday night games. So, by the way, if you notice somebody that is missing from these rankings, and they either played on Thursday night or if they're on bye, that's why they're not included in these rankings. And make sure you check out my quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end rankings videos as well. And make sure you give my profile on X a follow. I'm going to leave that link in the description. Thanks. Now we have running backs that I think are probably going to be in that low-end RB2 range to high-end RB2 range. We have Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, Swift, Stevenson, Cook, Montgomery, Jones, Taylor, and Jacobs. Najee Harris is matched up against Baltimore. I do think he scores a rushing touchdown, which is going to salvage his day. I think he's going to be rather inefficient on the ground, but due to the touchdown, I think that saves him. Then we have Travis Etienne against Detroit. Detroit's rush defense is elite, even without Aiden Hutchinson. I do think, though, that with the absence of Tank Bigsby, that's going to give him such increased volume that he's going to be a safe low-end RB2. Then we have J.K. Dobbins against Cincy. I do think he scores a touchdown as well, saving his fantasy day. I don't think the total output otherwise is going to be tremendous. Then we have DeAndre Swift against Green Bay. After a tremendously slow start to the year, he really picked it up. I don't think he's going to have an incredibly efficient day overall, but I think due to sheer volume alone on the ground and through the air, that it is going to give him a safe floor. Then we have Ramondre Stevenson against the Rams. I think he sees quite a bit of work in the passing game. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think due to sheer volume, he's going to be a safe RB2. James Cook is playing against Kansas City. I do think he's going to be horribly inefficient in terms of on the ground, but I think that with Dalton Kincaid being ruled out, that gives him an increased usage in the passing game, giving him a really safe floor. I don't have him projected for a touchdown. If he does, he's going to score a lot higher, but due to sheer volume and with the probability of extended looks in the passing game, I do think he's a much better play than he would otherwise be this week. Then we have David Montgomery against Jacksonville. I think he's going to be incredibly efficient on the ground. I think he gets a couple of looks in the passing game. I don't have him projected for a touchdown, but if he does, I think he finishes as a low end RB1. Then we have Aaron Jones against Tennessee. I don't think that he scores a touchdown, but I think he sees a solid amount of work on the ground and heavy utilization through the air against Tennessee. Then we have JT against the Jets. The Jets defense post Robert Saleh has been pretty poor, actually. I do think he's going to be relatively efficient on the ground. I don't have him scoring a touchdown. I think A-Rich steals the rushing touchdown, but I still think that he's going to receive a solid amount of volume and be efficient overall. Then we have Josh Jacobs against Chicago. I think he's going to be pretty efficient on the ground. I think he scores a touchdown. And I think he sees a lot of work in the passing game as the Packers try to avoid the cornerbacks of the Bears. Now we have running backs that I think are mid to low end RB1s, but probably aren't candidates to be the RB1 this week. We have Hunt, Brown, Walker, Henry, Kamara, and Hall. Fun fact about Kareem Hunt, he had 10 targets this past week, and in 3 of the past 4 weeks in a full PPR has been the RB11 or better. Buffalo's a fantastic matchup. I think he exploits it and gets a touchdown. Then we have Chase Brown against the Chargers. In the absence of Zach Moss, he's been tremendous for us on the ground and through the air. I do think that Khalil Herbert is going to start to eat into the workload gradually, but at this point, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near enough to keep him outside of my top 12, even in a tough matchup. Then we have Kenneth Walker III against San Fran. It is an advantageous matchup. I think he's going to be utilized a ton in the short passing game as an extension of the run game, because I do think they're going to have to pass the ball quite a bit to stay in this game with the 49ers, but I do think that gives him a tremendous floor and an immense ceiling as well. Then we have Derrick Henry against Pittsburgh. He has started to slow down in tougher matchups recently, but he's as good of a bet as any to score a touchdown. I do think that continues, but I do think that he's going to be pretty inefficient on the ground compared to what we've seen at least. Then we have Alvin Kamara against Cleveland. It's a really tough matchup, but 2 weeks ago he had over 150 rushing yards. He still sees a ton of work in the passing game. He's basically a lock to get 5 targets basically every week. And so with that usage, that makes him a weekly top 10 option. And Breece Hall against Indianapolis. He has had 3 straight really low output games. Indianapolis is a get-right matchup, though. I think that he's going to be pretty efficient on the ground and through the air. I do think he scores a touchdown, and I think he's going to start to continue to be a top 10 option for us once again. Now we have running backs that I think are mid to elite RB1s and are very realistic chances to be the RB1 this week. We have Jahmyr Gibbs, Joe Mixon, Kyren Williams, Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane, and McCaffrey. Jahmyr Gibbs is coming off a relatively disappointing game by his standards. I think he's going to eat Jacksonville alive, though. I do think he scores a touchdown and sees some work in the passing game. Then we have Joe Mixon against Dallas. He has been one of the most consistent running backs when he's played. Dallas is going to, they're not going to pose any threat to him. He's going to be quite efficient and score a touchdown, in my opinion. Then we have Kyren Williams against New England. He's coming off 2 weeks in which he didn't score a touchdown. Every other week before that, he's had at least one. I think he gets back on track here against the Patriots. I think they're going to be winning pretty handily. And so I think he's going to receive a lot of usage on the ground and score a touchdown. Then we have Bijan against Denver. He has been on a tear recently. I don't think that discontinues by any means. I think he scores a touchdown, sees a lot of work in the passing game, and has over 100 rushing yards. Then we have Devon Achane against the Vegas Raiders. He is coming off a relatively poor week by his standards, but with Tua, besides this past week, he's been amazing in every week that Tua's played. I think that continues against the Vegas Raiders. I think he's going to be tremendously efficient, and I do think he scores a touchdown on the ground. Then we finally have Christian McCaffrey at number 1. I think he's going to be way more efficient this week than he was this past week on the ground, but it was really encouraging to see him be tremendous in the passing game. I think that continues. I think he sees a ton of volume and is more likely than not every week going to be at least a top 3 option, but probably number 1 in my rankings due to being part of probably at least one of the best offenses in the NFL and receiving some of the highest utilization of any running back. And so to conclude, running backs I think are probably low to high-end RB3s. We have Allen, Ford, Algier, Akers, White, Charbonnet, Madison, Spears, and Warren. Running backs that I think are probably high-end RB3s to low-end RB2s. We have Estime, Chubb, Dowdle, and Pollard. RBs that I think are potentially low-end RB2s to high-end RB2s. We have Harris, Etienne, Dobbins, Swift, Stevenson, Cook, Montgomery, Jones, Taylor, and Jacobs. Running backs that I think are mid to low-end RB1s, but I wouldn't consider likely candidates to be the RB1 overall this week. We have Hunt, Brown, Walker, Henry, Kamara, and Hall. And then running backs that I think are mid to elite RB1s with a realistic shot at being the RB1 this week. We have Jahmyr Gibbs, Joe Mixon, Williams, Robinson, Achane, and McCaffrey. All right, you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, I project out all of the non-Thursday night games, so make sure you check out my quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end rankings as well. And make sure you give my profile on X a follow. I'm going to leave that link in the description. And if you like what you've seen and heard, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel. Thanks.